just go. Sorry, I thought I was being introduced. I just kind of waited back there. They're like, Shannon, just go. Okay, here I am. Hi. It's the fun of it, really. They've been amazing back there. So you can't imagine how you come into something like this and are scared to death because you've never done it before. And the staff here is just incredible. So thank you, guys. Seriously. They make us look so good. All right, so when I got chosen to talk about technology, you can imagine how thrilled I was. I am not a technology gal, right, honey? You know, yes, my Geek Squad husband. So what I can tell you about technology is what I've seen and what I've experienced. But what I can talk about is what I've seen and experienced when it comes to the power of technology and when it comes to experiences that bring people together. In the experience industry today, technology is among the key drivers of guest immersion and satisfaction. It is responsible for taking us on out-of-this-world adventures, thrilling us with new sensations, and making our visits as seamless as possible, including making it way too easy to spend a lot of money. But when technology isn't accessible, it excludes and becomes a barrier to enjoyment. Apart from limiting people from having a good time, it can frustrate to the point where it seems the experience creator didn't care about my friends and I at all. Because when we talk about accessibility, we aren't just talking about individuals with disabilities, we're talking about communities of people along an entire spectrum of abilities, visible and not. So on the flip side, when the underlying technology is accessible, it can optimize experiences on both the individual and collective levels. When I walk into a theme park, an attraction, restaurant, movie theater, 9 times out of 10, I'm there with people. And we're not there to have fun as individuals. It's not like I roll in with my husband and kids and say, later, guys, I'll be at the bar. That has happened. Sorry. It was a while ago, though. Maybe I would, but seriously, we're there to have fun together. Technology can help make sure no one is left behind. These days, we've got VR, AR, MR, XR, 3D, MX, 4D, 7D, and I honestly just can't keep up. All these new tools at our disposal, but how do we use them to adapt to the diverse needs of our communities and ensure full participation on the part of every guest? So here to answer that question, much better than I ever could, obviously, is our next panel of experts. Please welcome to the stage Stephen Thomas Cavett, Vince Fung, Shannon Diedman, Joe Fox, Catherine Woodcock, and your moderator for this panel, Clara Rice.
To talk to you about accessibility, the A. Yesterday, we saw that photo of the 1962 World's Fair creators, and we mentioned that there was a lack of gender diversity, and there was a lack of ethnic diversity. You also didn't see any white canes, you didn't see any wheelchairs, you didn't see any guide dogs, and you didn't see any ASL interpreters. And I would argue that on our design teams today, you still don't. So we're going to unpack that for a little bit. So why am I the one here talking to you about this? Growing up in Northern Virginia, my annual family trips in the summer with my family to King's Dominion and Busch Gardens were a fun reality for me. And our Amtrak trip to Disneyland, or Disney World, was the trip of a lifetime. But this was also my reality. I was born on August 8th, 1977. About a week after I was born, my father noticed that my right eye was significantly smaller than my left. That day, I was diagnosed with a rare abnormality called persistent fetal vasculature. What is that, you may ask? In this image, you see the lens at the top, which is actually the front of the eye, and the retina at the bottom, which is actually at the back of the eye. That stalk you see in the middle is a system of blood vessels and tissue that is supposed to dissolve in the 3rd trimester in utero. Mine did not. It persisted. As a result, you create this tug of war between the lens and the retina that causes a cataract to form over the lens and for the retina to detach. Without surgery, the eye would essentially pull itself apart. Sorry for that image right before lunch. Legend has it that at the age of 17 days old, I was the youngest woman ever to have cataract surgery. Unfortunately, it was unsuccessful and the lens had to be removed. I am now no longer on a 20/20 scale in my right eye. I'm on what's called a counting finger scale. So if you stick 2 fingers out, I might be able to see them from a couple feet away. But I promise, with my left eye closed, you're still an extremely gorgeous blur. Now, growing up in the 70s and 80s and even 90s, it was a great time to be a monocular theater goer, or amusement park, theme park goer, because most of the experiences are what we would call analog, or classic reality. There was Figment, there was Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, there was my first roller coaster, the Loch Ness Monster, there was Snow White's Adventures, which at the age of 42 still scares the crap out of me. Right? And just when I thought, actually, the only major 3D experience in a major theme park was Captain EO. And just when I thought it couldn't get any better, in 2010, Universal and Despicable Me gave me a mascot. Stuart. If anybody remembers Stuart, the one-eyed minion. But in the last 12 years, dozen or so years, there's been this cacophony of technology. As Shannon alluded, more Ds, more Rs, more K, VR, MR, XR, 4D, 5D, 2D, 3D, 4K, 8K. I'm sure Christy at this point is working on a 72K projector. And when those experiences are blowing the doors off of entertainment for some, are they closing the doors for people who can't see things fully, who can't hear things fully? And so I wanted to unpack this a little bit. Particularly in my instance, 3D is at the most disengaging and at worst nauseating. Why is that? And so I found this amazing YouTube video that I thought was going to answer all of my questions. It was on a prominent science center's website. It was 3D 101. It was going to explain why stereoscopic vision was important. And it was going to tell me that I was going to be able to experience eventually wonderful 3D experiences.
Very far away. Sucks for you, Cyclops. So now, let's go back.
Once more for the people in the back there. So that kind of made me feel like this. Like I feel whenever I'm standing in line for a theme park ride for 3 hours, only to find that I can't enjoy it as much as everybody else. I'm sure there's a better way to address improving access for folks with disabilities than Sucks for You, Cyclops. So I am glad that I have a panel of experts here today that are going to talk a little bit more about improving access for visitors with disabilities. So we have Stephen Thomas Cavett from Iconic Sound and Music, Shannon Dedman, designer and ADA coordinator, Joe Fox, stepping from behind the stage onto the stage, finally. Vince Fung from Ultraleap. And Dr. Catherine Woodcock, professor at Ryerson University. So Catherine, when we began this journey together, we had quite a spirited conversation about what does normal mean? And what is the right term? Is it disabled? Is it impaired? And I'd love for you to kind of refresh us on that conversation and unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah, I remember that conversation. It was kind of delicate and diplomatic and dainty and careful. I don't want to be pedantic, but the word disability is a really important word to me. Disability is a word that is positive and it's powerful. Disability has civil rights attached to it. So under international codes and under national laws and regulations, there are certain rights that are attached to disability that aren't attached to any of the other words. Deaf people like to talk about deaf culture. There's no rights to your culture, but there's rights to disability. On the other end, impairment is inherently a negative word. You talk about impaired drivers or people whose judgments are impaired. And then you talk about an impairment of a person in terms of a characteristic that they have. You can say you have a bodily function that's impaired, and you might have a bodily function that's impaired, but you are not impaired. You are a person. You're a mother, you're a skier, you're a teacher, you're a knitter, but you have that impairment as a possession. You put it in its place. Disability is a powerful term. Now, you don't have to label yourself as disabled. You don't have to label somebody else as disabled, but to possess the civil rights power of disability opens the door to the accommodations that you need. And it goes without saying that the word handicap went out the window years ago. And that's my cue to mention, do we have the slide that shows our little flow chart, our infographic?
Unfortunately, we have the wrong slide deck up. We have an old slide deck up, so we don't have
here,
that.
there's my face.
But
You can see me, that's the same.
There is a handout where we talk about all these different definitions and terms, and it'll be on the table outside.
Okay, so the infographic, we know that a lot of people are really worried about saying the wrong thing. And they feel that if they don't talk about disability very often, the language changes and they're afraid of embarrassing themselves. So we put together a little infographic that gives you kind of an algorithm. And the first step is do talk about it. If you don't talk about disability, you probably don't think about disability often enough. So don't be afraid to talk about it. The second step is use correct terms of specific disabilities. If you're only talking about people with visual impairments, talk about that group. Don't talk about disabled people, because if you talk about a broad group, then you subsume everybody with disabilities when you only meant people with amputations on both legs, for instance. So be specific about the disability you're talking about. Don't use euphemisms. I've never heard ever a disability activist refer to themselves as special needs. It's not a special thing to want to be included, to be able to go to school, to have a job, to earn a living, to vote. It's not special, that's normal. Don't use disability as a metaphor. Don't talk about things falling on deaf ears. Don't talk about turning a blind eye. That equates disability to a character defect. We see it a lot, especially in the political environment now. People are talking about that sort of turn of speech. Don't do that, because it slurs all of us in the same move. And don't give me the job of inspiring you. I'm not an inspiration. I'm just getting through a day like everybody else, you know? My disability is a fact. It's not a party trick. So if you get those things sorted out, it shouldn't be something to be afraid to talk about. We didn't put on our little algorithm people first language, because there are some people with disabilities who don't particularly care for people first. Autistic people love to be autistic. It's a superpower. They love that. So ask people what they prefer to be called, and respect what people prefer to be called. And also, if you've said people with disabilities and you say disabled people on second usage, linguistically that's okay to do that as well. But please, please, please don't make the disability the adjective, the deaf, the blind. Give us a noun. Respect us and give us the dignity of a noun, whether it's deaf students, blind teachers, deaf workers, blind guests. Give us a noun, whatever the noun is appropriate. So why did Clara and I have different opinions on disability? Because she felt maybe a little wiggly about it, where I felt pretty strongly about it. And there's a difference in the nature of your condition, how severe your condition is, how long you have had it, and how old you were when you got it. And all of those things affect, whether it affects your daily life or whether you know how to cope with it. And so in Clara's case, as I understand it, as long as it's not 3D or referring to a complete peripheral vision, Clara doesn't feel disabled on a daily basis, where I'm disabled every day. Anytime there's communication happening or sound in the environment, I'm disabled every day.
But we joke that if somebody was in a car with me, not only, they would definitely feel my disability. Kind of terrifying.
Yeah. But I will say it's not all downside. There are never babies on my airplanes.
So I think what we're getting to here is that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to accessibility. And that leads us into Shannon. You've done so much work with universal design, which kind of speaks to that. And so can you go into that a little bit more about your experience in that area?
Yeah, actually, universal design, kind of the golden apple of universal design is reaching for, I don't want to call it a one-size-fits-all solution, but it's wanting to reach the largest group possible and provide the greatest functionality in your environments and the objects in the environments for as many people as possible. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're trying to get a one-size-fits-all solution, but sometimes you can design something that benefits everybody, and that's when it's true universal design. There's examples of this up here, things that you see every single day. These don't just help people with disabilities, these help everybody. These are very common things. So people who do universal design step back, they think about all of the different kinds of people, all the different kinds of bodies and minds that might be experiencing whatever they're designing, and try and apply as many points of view as possible to their thought process.
So, Joe, what are some of the tricks of the trade that are currently being employed to make experiences more accessible?
So I wanted to go and talk about some of the definitions of those words and acronyms that we throw out. We seem to love tech acronyms. So I wanted to talk about assistive technology. Assistive technology is very specifically, that's too small for me to read, ironically. Assistive, adaptive, and rehabilitative devices for people with disabilities or the elderly population. Adaptive technologies are technologies that leverage that to make the experience more available. And an enabling technology is the larger encompassing section of that space. So if we talk about some of the early efforts of, some of these things, we look at attraction. Man, it is really small. I don't know how you guys do this. I apologize. First time in the chair. Can we go to the next one? So attraction scripts. I don't know if any of you guys have ever tried to do this. If you're in a dark theater trying to read the script of an attraction, every time I'd work on a design for an attraction, I tried to experience it all the ways that the guests are going to experience it. Taking a flashlight and trying to read the script while you're enjoying the show, not really the best experience. My experience with that in Shanghai was I went to see a show and I wanted to understand it, so they had an English version of the script, but I couldn't understand any of the show because I wasn't paying attention to it anymore. Then we started to do inductive loop. Any of you have ever been to a theater, they will install a loop in the ground that allows hearing aids and other adaptive technologies to pick up on that technology. It's very useful. It's also very limited. It uses FM frequencies and unfortunately just doesn't work about 60% of the time. Rear window and reflective captioning, if you've been to Disney, you've probably seen this in some of their theaters. It works really well as long as you can position it perfectly. It does become an obstruction for people sitting behind you, and it doesn't always work. Some theaters have installed it where you can put it in the cup holder, which is very handy, but again, you have to remember to go get that. And then closed captioning on TV and video has become much more pervasive to the point where even YouTube videos are now closed captioned by default, and even if you don't upload the content, they will do that for you. Unfortunately, some of those were very much beset with issues. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see a couple of examples of what those were. So some tech only work if you're in line of sight, or worse, if you're not in line of sight. So if you put a screen down here on an attraction, when the attraction's up here, that's not very useful. Right now you're trying to look at me and look at the content up on the screen. Even that's a little bit of a challenge. Now try imagine looking at something here and enjoying the content that's up there. It's not quite the same. Apologies for the word content, Kyle. Most tech only work in certain domains. So if you've got a roller coaster, you don't want to have something that they have to carry like this on that roller coaster because that will happen. That's really not a good idea. Even headsets, VR headsets, people have started doing VR roller coasters, which is really kind of neat, except one, you're wasting the fact that they're on a roller coaster because you're getting that nice motion of simulating that experience, but you're also taking them out of that built environment that you spend all that money on. Why would you do that? You also run the risk of those VR headsets falling off your head. Ask any motion sickness sufferer how they feel after a 3D simulator attraction. Ask Clara how she feels after that experience. It's just drastically worse because you can't prevent that from experiencing it. The first time I took my wife to Epcot, we rode Mission Space together. I told her it wasn't that bad. That was a mistake. She was truly panicked at the end of that because her motion sickness was so bad, and she just had to get out of that environment. And unfortunately, you're enclosed. So on top of that, you have all of the phobias of being enclosed in a very small space. And then frequently, they just don't work, aren't available, or you have to think to ask them for this in advance. This is a picture from Universal Hollywood's website. I'm not throwing them under the bus. This is very common. But if you'll notice, the language says you have to remember to ask for this a week in advance if you want a translator. That's cool, unless you just realize you're going to drop into the park at the last minute, or if you want to just go and go see a show. If you want to go see Waterworld, Waterworld's one of the coolest shows on Earth. If you don't think to prepare for that in advance, you're not going to get all of the detail out of that show, and that's unfortunate.
What I do want to say about Universal Studios, they did take 3D out of Minion Mayhem, which was awesome, and I'd like to think it's because Stuart couldn't see it properly. What?
This is one of my favorite slides, obviously because it blends two of my favorite IPs. So Tony Stark is showing us what augmented reality looks like. This is playing with the virtual while you're still enjoying the physical. Then you have Ready Player One, which is more of the virtual reality. Yes, he is in a physical built environment, but he can't see any of that. His physical interactions are with the things that he's wearing and the things in his hands, but all the rest of it's happening here and here, which means it's not as overall immersive as an augmented reality would be because you're missing out all the rest of those senses, all the rest of that tactile feel. So Tony's world there is a lot more immersive, and then you take that to the next level on the next slide where we take VR and AR and turn it into mixed reality. And I think this is where things get really interesting for us as we do the designs, because we can say, we have these physical things that we can interact with. How do we make the virtual interact with that and make it more fun? You can see this in really simple games like they've done in the theme parks where you've got a phone app and it's interacting with a device. There was a really fun game at Epcot. I forget what the name of it was now, but it was themed to one of the Disney Junior attractions or shows. Anyone remember the name? Phineas and Ferb, that one, yeah. So you walked through and you played this game, and so it's really designed and targeted for kids, but of course I played it. And so I would go through and things would happen in the park, and that mixed reality of, hey, I'm doing something on my phone, I'm playing games, I look like I'm not engaged in my environment, but hey, something over there just happened. That's a really cool moment. And yeah, that was targeted for kids, but you can do that with adults. I've talked about the augmented reality glasses. Imagine a virtual tour walking through the park, and I'm going to use Wizarding World of Harry Potter as an example. Imagine Daniel Radcliffe walking you through, hey, when we were doing the filming in Gringotts, this is what the scene was like, and this is what it was like as an actor walking in that moment. How cool would that be to have that voice, that person telling you that story, and you're the only one experiencing it with him? So that's the thing that mixed reality takes us to. And extended reality, XR, is just a hyper term for all of the rest of that stuff. So that's where we're at the moment.
Moving on to Stephen, that's great. Thank you for that overview. How do you create visual experience with sound without having to put the guest in a piece of equipment or in a headset? And conversely, how do you create sound for those who can't hear so well?
Well, first question first. Visual hearing is about collaboration for us. So we work with other teams that work with other senses to help create a more comprehensive experience that would include audio. And I don't mean in the sense that you would feel the sound. You're feeling the room just like everyone else. And for us, that's important because we're integrating into the story. It's not a collection of separate pieces. It's not a mosaic of different disciplines. It's integrated as a whole, and I think that's just good storytelling. But it also helps the cause that we're talking about, where the experience can be different per individual, but it's complete and integrated, and you can take from it what is important to you. So we feel like collaborating with other mediums. For example, I think this is an older slide, but it still works. It's fine. Or we could skip ahead to the alien.
How about I just
All right.
give you the reins for a minute
I
there?
don't know what's going to happen here. So these were. So this was I'll stop that. This was a 4D picture they worked on called Ice Age: No Time for Nuts. And this exemplifies the integrated storytelling I'm talking about, because certainly there was sound, but it's a 4D theater, so the room is moving, your seat is moving, you're being sprayed with air and water, and it's a visceral experience, tactile. They actually have smell. I think they call it smell-o-vision. So we're integrated in a web of other senses, and when I say integrated, I mean like my music is triggering a lot of these events. So anyways, this example would be no sound at all, and it's really kind of. Oh no, we went to sound effects only. So in the first one, there's nothing, and it's really unwatchable. Now we have sound effects, and you get to see where things activate a little bit. But now we move to the full. I hope it plays. Yes. This is with music and everything, and I think it's alive. And at this point, you're moving, like that big rumble at the beginning. Your seat is moving, and as Scrat is bouncing around, you are bouncing around. And for me, the difference between the last and the first is incredibly long, hard to get through. This seems to happen in half the amount of time. So the example is, it's a comprehensive experience, and when we tie all those elements in together, I think it makes a more complete experience.
Let's talk about inaudible sounds for a minute. Vince, you've done some interesting work with haptics based on ultrasound recently, in which you invited blind and deaf visitors to check out your products. So can we talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, thanks everyone for being here. Really glad I had the pleasure to talk about this and join Claire and everybody else on this panel. So haptic technology. Just a really quick explanation of haptic. We use haptic to describe things that are related to the sense of touch, and we use touch a lot. Most of us, it's very natural. We reach out, we use our hands, we feel things, we manipulate things. It's all through the sense of touch and through proprioception. So that's what we call haptics, and the haptic technology is a technology that allows the sense of touch for us to experience. So what is mid-air haptics then? Mid-air haptics is something that allow us to have those haptic experience without having to come in contact of any physical things. So in our case, Ultraleap, we use ultrasound. So that's what Claire was talking about, sounds that you couldn't hear because it's in higher frequency. And that allows guests to actually have those experiences very naturally with just their hands. So remove the barrier of having to hold something in your well, hands, using controllers or even putting on gloves. I mean, that's just added trouble for people to go through when they have to do an experience. So in May this year, the Aquarium of the Pacific opened up their new Pacific Visions wing. I don't know anybody is familiar with Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California, and yeah, I couldn't give them enough praise because they really designed this new wing with all the multi-sensory technology available, but not only that, but also with accessibility in mind. So it was great pleasure for us to have a chance to work with them to designate for a designated area, to designate accessible seating for folks who are there to have ability to actually experience our technology, to better enjoy the design of the future film that they have in this theater. And the theater itself is really quite something. They have 32 feet by 130 feet curved screen, as you can probably see in this picture, give the guests 180 degrees viewing angle, and also with a 36 feet oval disc on the floor as well for things to project. So there's multi images that could be shown and videos that could be shown, but they really want to make things accessible. So I really applaud them for doing that. So with that, what we do was we did a number of user testing when we work with the Aquarium of the Pacific and also Cortina Productions. They put together the content for this Designing the Future film that is being shown in the theater, and we involve a number of folks who are either blind or deaf or both to try out the haptic sensation that we can deliver to them and see how they react to the content of the film, what kind of emotion that they feel while watching the film with the film on and without, and also in terms of course the recall and how the curiosity might be piqued, because the message of the film is really powerful. It's really about how do we leverage the ocean, how do we design the future with the ocean to address the climate change that we're facing, which is a big problem. So it's been a great journey with them, and I look forward to working with them again for the next film, but it's been great. If you guys haven't been there, I definitely recommend to go check it out. The whole wing, and not just the theater, the whole wing is fully interactive, and there's a lot of touch element to it for people who might not be able to experience what they exhibit otherwise.
We have a couple of minutes before we bring this to a close. This has gone by very fast, as I knew it would. Catherine, I want to bring it full circle back to you. How much of an attraction has to be accessible for an experience to be accessible?
Well, I answer this question the same way I answer the question about accessible technology and education. If you're marking me out of 100%, I want access to 100%. And so the challenge is that every guest wants 100% of an attraction. Very often, we present more than 100% of an attraction, and therefore everybody goes home with maybe a different experience at the end of the day. So that's your constant challenge, to make sure that you're giving more than 100% of an attraction to everybody. So if you have exactly 100% of an attraction, and some of it is something I can't access, then I go home with less than what everybody else leaves with. If your attraction is rich, it's likely that everybody gets something that makes 100% for them. Something that they're seeing or smelling or hearing or touching or feeling through the air. That means, of course, that you're giving 140% all the time. Now, I don't particularly care about the music myself, but that doesn't mean because I don't care about music, other guests with deafness or hearing loss don't care about music. Some people with a recent hearing loss or people who are hard of hearing, they may care very much because they know exactly what's there that they're not getting all of. So, as I said before, the type of condition or the recency of onset, and so they may be very livid if you don't provide that access. So what I'm looking for is, does the attraction make sense to the guest? At the end of the day, when they go to the aquarium, can they tell you back the story that you tried to tell them? There have been some attractions where I enjoyed them very much, but I couldn't tell you the first thing about what the story was. So maybe I'm happy with it, but you're not happy that I didn't have the experience you tried to tell me. And there's a problem with just taking the assistive technology approach of sticking something on an attraction like a barnacle because it's patching over something that wasn't inherently accessible. And also you have things that if something is inaccessible to me, you make it available in some text or visual form, and then Clara says, well, I can't see that because it becomes a ripsaw. Every time you add something, that benefits one person as an assistive technology and somebody else can't access that. So instead of using assistive technology where Joe mentioned you have to sit in special seats, you have to go to certain shows, you got to go and wait and borrow special equipment, it sucks all the spontaneity out of your life, and it's supposed to be a day where you have joy and freedom, and it's not. It's a very planned day. So aside from being a burden to me, why is it only me that experiences that layer of the show? Think of it. If the haptics, if the vibrations, if the sensations are beneficial and enhancing to me, why doesn't everybody have them? So let's add that to every aspect of the show and put that layer on for everybody. So don't think of us as people who present a problem that you need to solve. Think of us as secret shoppers. We're the ones who are telling you that your attraction is not rich enough and you need to add another layer of storytelling. We'll tell you where the storytelling is thin and add that layer of storytelling for everybody. And I think that will benefit all of the guests in the end.
So bringing this to conclusion, we wanted to, and we had extensive discussion and debate, spirited debate, over what these key takeaways were over several months. And we came up with these 4, which number 1 is to think about inclusion not on opening day, but on day 1. Not only will it improve your karma, it will probably also improve your bottom line because you are not retrofitting things at the end when you discover that they are not accessible. Number 2, engage early and often, or to borrow from a common disability advocacy mantra, don't design about us without us. I think having consultants is great. I think having testers is an important step forward. But put us in that picture of the 1962 World's Fair. Put us on your teams from the beginning, not so that we're designing things for disabled visitors, but so that we're disabled designers designing for everyone. Number 3, be cognizant of cognitive and sensory overload. Just because I might be visually disabled doesn't mean I want the volume turned to 11. Just because Catherine is deaf doesn't mean that she wants the motion in the seat to be dialed up to a degree where it throws her out of it. Just because one sense is absent doesn't mean we need to completely overstimulate all the other senses. So be cognizant of that. And that, again, is when having somebody with a disability on your team can provide that input for you. Because I think as we've learned through all these 2 days, having diverse teams, having inclusive teams, having equitable teams normally ends up in a more successful, richer end product. And finally, leverage the senses to layer the experience, what Catherine just talked about. If you have an experience that has vibrant visuals, that has rich audio, that has tactile experiences, that have things that engage smells, even taste, you have a lot better chance of reaching that 100% level of experience than if you put all of your eggs in one sensory basket. So bringing everything to a close, I read a book recently called About Us, Disability Essays for the New York Times, and one of the quotes that struck me the most is that there are 2 types of people, those who are disabled and those who are not yet disabled. According to the World Health Organization, there are 466 million people right now worldwide who are hard of hearing and 1.3 billion people with a visual disability. Those numbers are expected to double by 2050. So even if there is some blind-deaf overlap, you are talking about the entire population of China. Now, even if a small fraction, much less than that 7% that Phil Lindsay talked about yesterday, goes to a theme park, goes to a museum, goes to an attraction, that is millions of happy new and repeat visitors or millions of missed opportunities. So we're going to leave you with a few challenges, and I'm sure you guys are thinking at this point, oh my God, I've been challenged so much today. Woman, just stop with the challenges. But I have 3 challenges for you. First and foremost, please take this dialogue outside these walls. And we have some tools that I'm going to talk about in just a second on how you can do that, in addition to that chart we mentioned earlier. Whether it's via the app, whether it's in your staff meeting next week, please keep this dialogue going. Number 2, and Catherine hinted on this, please see myself, Catherine, other people with disabilities, not as obstacles to overcome or problems to solve, but as collaborators in dreaming bigger and designing differently. We challenge you that at your next design charrette, your next blue sky meeting, in your next big idea, to create attractions and experiences that don't just accommodate, tolerate, or include some, but are meaningful, memorable experiences for everyone. Thank you. So because we are storytellers and because we're experiential and because this is a sensory panel, instead of just having handouts as a takeaway of how to move forward, how to design differently, how to create better, we created these little fortune tellers. Do you remember these? From grade school. Does it even say SATE? That's very clever. Thank you, Catherine. And one of the reasons we wanted to have these is to not only talk about many of the concepts we touched on today, but you tend to use these right at the beginning of elementary school or middle school when the bullying starts. And Catherine, I'm sure, has experienced some of that. I certainly experienced that. So I've made a few of these. I've pre-made some. Here you go, Adam. And then we have some safety scissors at the side of the theater if you want to spend your lunch hour making some of your own. So thanks again. Okay, questions from the audience. How do we educate about the kinds of disabilities we need to design for? What are the resources?
Well, the first thing I would answer to that is try and ask yourself, what is your attraction demanding from people? Don't start with what disabilities and go through an encyclopedia and look them all up and go through them A to Z. But what is your attraction requiring and expecting in terms of capacities from people? And then find the bottlenecks in the attraction that requires something and there's no way around it. That's where you have to enrich your experience. And if you have people with different disabilities in your design team or in your consulting network, you can address the problem before you come up with a solution. We don't like this, I don't want to be disrespectful, but mouse on the doormat approach to design things where people come up with something that's supposed to fix a problem they think I have, and they go drop the mouse on the doormat, and I'm like, well, it does what you said it would do, but that's not a problem I've ever actually had. So if you involve people early enough and look at what things are being demanded from people in the attraction and then work outwards from that, rather than try to do an encyclopedia of best practices and tick things off on a list, that would be my guidance.
I would say this process has been, sorry to say, eye-opening, pardon the pun, for me, because I've never really acknowledged my disability before. So even just researching my disability and looking at resources like TED Talks and the World Health Organization's, I'm going to butcher this, the classification of disability, health, and functioning, the International Classification of Disability and Functioning, has been a great education for me throughout this process. What are the biggest excuses you hear for not being accessible, and how do you counter them?
too expensive.
Yeah, and I would counter that with if you build this into your process early, if you get your company, yourself, your independent thinking about these problems, from the time whatever your idea is just a glint in your eye, if you're already thinking about how to reach as many people as possible, how to give the most people 100%, the costs will amortize out. You know, spending 5 minutes here, an hour there thinking through these things, it's really not going to cost you that much. And like Clara said, if you have to go and retrofit something later, that's way more expensive.
A great example is your universal design toilet where it's got the automatic flush system. That costs pennies more than a regular toilet, but it drastically improves the accessibility of that device. It doesn't cost much more. It may improve your overall operational cost because you don't have people smashing a thing to flush it, so you don't have to worry about as much plumbing and repair cost. So there are certainly ways that you can leverage that and tackle that without having to spend additional money. You also have the additional opportunities of those guests that you would not serve otherwise. Like Clara said, that's a huge audience that you could just be shutting out.
And it benefits everyone, right? I looked into what's called the curb cut effect, and curb cuts were initially supposed to be for wheelchairs. But then people with strollers started using them.
Amen.
And then people on crutches started using them. And then people with shopping carts started using them. And now I never think of using anything but a curb cut. So that's one of many examples where something that was actually designed for people with disabilities ended up helping everyone. And the more we can think that way, the greater the benefit.
And I can add to that.
Another excuse I hear often is that an authority won't let me. So in terms of the actual ride devices, the manufacturer won't let me, or the local fire marshal won't let me. In some places in the world, two disabled people cannot ride a ride at the same time, regardless of whether they have the same disability or a different disability. So I couldn't ride a ride with a deaf friend because there'd be two of us. Because they're worried about evacuation for some reason, and it's just because they can't be bothered to come up with a way that works around it, and so they make a rule, and the poor operator is stuck in the middle. Perhaps the operator has good intentions of trying to make an accessible attraction, but some authority that has some say over them has said, no, you can't have a person with any disability on this ride because we're worried about this specific disability, which goes to the point I mentioned earlier. Be specific which disability is problematic. And the jurisdiction authorities maybe have said no.
Well, and to that, maybe the social media call out gets you the ability to say, hey, AHJs, you are purposely excluding people. Let us use social media to be a fix to go out and call them out and say, no, we need to do better.
Well, and I was going to go back to your curb cut example, and actually this would be from my work, the answer to your second question that you asked me. How would we use our audio technology to help people with disabilities, hearing in particular? And it's exactly the same concept as the curb cut. We were working with multi-layered audio just to give people individualized experiences. But actually through panels that I've done and different people that we work with, there was another need, and it was to serve people that had different impairments, not just hearing impairments. My godson is...
Disabilities.
Sorry. My bad. Disabilities. My godson is autistic. He has sensitivity issues, and that's very important to me personally, but also to my company because we can help that, at least from the audio standpoint. And this is all a function of the fact that the tool allows us to be multi-layered. So there's no additional cost. It's just a thought. It's just something we have to pay attention to, and I think that it fits in so well with what we're talking about on this panel, and why I'm so happy to be here, because it brings the awareness to the issue that we can use this tool in a different way, and we just nudge. We don't have to leap, we don't have to jump over a mountain, we don't have to recreate the wheel, we just have to think about it. And that's really exciting for me personally, because I relish these challenges. That's what my company is built around, and it's very exciting to me. So I can design for my godson, and Clara, we talked about this a little bit, but in no small part because of this panel, I've actually hired a deaf person to come on to my team to help us understand better how that works. I mean, it's really exciting to me personally to have something, hiring a deaf person for an audio company, which might seem very counterintuitive at first, but I see a lot of challenge and opportunity in that, and I think what we hope for her to bring to us is that that it will challenge us, yes, but it will help us see things that we couldn't even have imagined when we started doing the work that we're doing.
There's an organization called the Disabled List, and it's run by a woman named Liz Jackson, who was featured in this About Us compilation in the New York Times. And I reached out to her because one of the barriers that I hear is we don't know where to find designers with disabilities. And she said, I'd be happy to help you as long as you're ready for them to lead teams and meaningfully participate instead of just coming in midway through the process. So if you would like that resource, I'd be happy to pass that along to you. So with that, I'd like to thank you so much for not only just being here today, but on being on this journey with me for the last 2 months. It's been wonderful and meaningful, and thank you very much. And please, as I mentioned before, keep this dialogue going. Let this be the starting point, not the end point. Thank you.
Thanks, Clara.
Thank you.